Hello, hello, and welcome to the fourth and final installment for 2025 of the Business of Women's Sports SBJ Live Series. I'm Jenna Zara, Director of Women's Sports Content here at SBJ. I want to thank you all for being here. Today's focus, media rights and production, and who better to shepherd us through here than SBJ media reporter, Austin Karp. We're certainly going out with a bang. We have a terrific panel assembled here for you today. And just a few housekeeping issues before we can jump in. And I definitely want to have plenty of time here because we have a robust agenda on tap. If I could call everyone's attention to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see two buttons. The chat feature. This session is intended to be interactive. It makes it better when you all are talking to each other and participating. So please use the chat, introduce yourself, say who you're with. If you see somebody you know, shout out, say hi. It's a great way to do it. I like to keep an eye on it. It's always amazing how far we have people tuning in from. So it's one of my favorite updates to do at the end of this. I try to see geographically who our furthest caller in is. So and then next to that is a questions button. Please note we're not going to do a formal Q&A at the end. So if you have a question, please put it in the question function as you think of it. We'll be monitoring them throughout to be able to get as many of those asked as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it on over to Austin, and everybody have a great session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Let's get to it. I want to do some brief introductions, before we get to questions. If you signed up for this session, you probably have read full bios, but I'm going to give, like I said, some brief introductions. Bella Alarie from the 9 Sports. It's a platform covering women's sports. Raquel Braun from One Volleyball. Cheri Kempf from Athletes Unlimited, and Susie Piotrkowski from ESPN. Thank you all for joining us.
Of course, we're happy to be here.
Thank you. Let's get to it. I want to start with a question for the group. If we're talking about the growth of women's sports media in terms of rights, in terms of production levels, let's think of it as a 9-inning game. What inning do you think we're in? Bella, I'll start with you.
Well, it feels like only the beginning. I think the way that women's sports have grown in terms of its coverage, especially with that angle, as I've been thinking about a ton at the 9 Sports, I think there's just so much opportunity to continue to cover the women's game and continue to see it on TV with media rights deals. It just feels like it's only the beginning, and it's incredibly exciting to see how certain sports have really taken off and how new and exciting leagues and just different avenues for these athletes to play on a professional level, at a collegiate level. And just to get the opportunity to see it is really exciting. So I think we're maybe in the first or second inning, and we have just a lot of growth ahead of us. But it's incredibly exciting to be in this space at this time.
I'm calling it like top of the third. Like we're still in the front half of this game, but I think we've seen a lot of growth, and more than that, I'd like to say growth is good, scale is better. And we are finally getting to scale with certain properties and even more properties than we've ever seen historically. We, of course, being ESPN, we like to say that we are the leader in women's sports. 68% of women's sports consumption comes by way of our platforms. And we have seen certainly holistic growth, but we've raised the floor. So I'm saying we're a little further than just the very beginning, but we got the majority of this game left. And what I see is opportunity, tremendous opportunity to continue mainstreaming women's sports. Certainly our priority, women's sports. We've done that more and more, and you'll continue to see more and more of that. So I'm looking forward to this game continuing, and when we can kind of recognize that we're further in our life cycle and we can kind of leave some of the advocacy work behind and just continue to focus on developing and building the business.
So I was Susie, picking up on where you ended there. I was going to say third to fourth, and I'm in LA, so Dodgers high after this past weekend. But I think so much groundwork has gone in the last 10, 20, 30, I mean, the WNBA is on 30 years almost. So there's been a lot of work that's already gone into the women's sports game and how it shows up across all these different media platforms. And so I feel like we've gone through the warm up of the first few innings, and now everybody's starting to hit their groove. And to Susie's point, it's no longer, we should do this because it's the right thing to do, or it's, it's part of our CSR and we just want to, it's not a charitable effort. It's solid business decisions to get behind women's sports. And so I think that front end work that some of these leagues have already put in and help us get here for, people like Cheri and me who are in newer sports properties, I think we are the beneficiaries of a lot of the legwork that ESPN has put in, the WNBA, the NWSL, and its predecessor leagues, to now be able to start new leagues and new sports properties in the women's sports space and not have to start all the way from the beginning.
And I'm going to call it as a softball analyst here, guys. I think we're in the top of the fourth. And the reason I would say that is because if you're doing things right, you've gone through the lineup one time at this point. The pitchers know the hitters once, and the hitters start to know what's coming in from the pitch. So at any rate, but I agree with everybody. It's still early in the game. There's a lot of excitement, and it's still anybody's game. And I think the most important thing of all for me is that we're in it.
All right, Susie and Cheri, I want to go to you with this one. Given the new deal that came out last week, it's a 3-year extension for Athletes Unlimited and ESPN. Of note on the softball side, 50 exclusive AUSL games on ESPN, and ABC's carrying one championship series event. And it's going to be the first time a pro softball game has been on broadcast TV in the U.S. So, Cheri, how important was it to get this deal done and keep that visibility with ESPN?
It's vital. And I'll tell you why. I am fortunate enough to have been on the front side as talent for ESPN, watching them build the college softball monster, really. When I was first hired by Meg Aronowitz, ESPN was covering one regional and one regular season game. And so to see what Meg and others have done to grow that game to the entertainment product that it is today. And I said the word a second ago, it was intentional. When we were on production meetings, it was, yes, we want to continue to speak to the endemic fan, but we want to make sure that the person who has stopped on this channel understands it, because when people understand something and they can talk about it enough with their peers, they're going to keep tuning in. They're going to like it a whole lot better. So I'll never forget, I think Meg said it 100 times, explain to them what slapping is, because imagine the casual person just stops and you say, it looks like she's going to slap here. So at any rate, everything that we did was intentional to grow that audience, and it was successful. So now in the professional softball world, for us to be able to really jump on the coattails of that, and then to help ESPN grow that audience to something even bigger through the June, July, and August is, again, it can't be overstated. And I will say here that I think one of the most important things that we're finding in women's sports is allies. And Susie was huge to get this done, as were so many people at ESPN, but so many women that understand the value of the products.
Yeah, well, we're lucky to be in partnership with AUSL and what you guys are building. I think for us, same word, vital. It was, I'm very fortunate to sit in the programming department, and my role is a unique one. I'm responsible for our women's sports programming strategy, and then I get to work alongside the experts within our sport categories, and we got the best in the business. We all sat down in a room and looked at each other and said, we can have this at every single level locked up. It is a sport that continues to surge for us. I'm going to drop a couple little nuggets, but Game 3, we had 2.2 million viewers for the Women's College World Series, and we peaked at 2.8 million. There were other really substantive events going on at the same time that we certainly held our own against on competitor networks that are far further along in their game. So we were really, really excited, and it was a non-negotiable for us to ensure that we continue to support the growth. AUSL in their first year, we saw double-digit growth year over year, and we expect that to continue. So I sit in a very privileged position where I get to say we may not need it all, but we need the best. And AUSL and that softball category for us represents a tremendous opportunity. It certainly is the best. And very rarely do you get to engage with fans at the youth level, at the collegiate level, and the professional level, especially in an emerging space. So again, we know that for some time, we were the unchallenged leader in women's sports. So maintaining that leadership position is incredibly important to us, not because we want to just say we're the leaders, but we're about serving fans anytime, any place. And that means all fans. And from my vantage point, that means especially women's sports fans. So serving them with the sport of softball holistically was again, vitally important.
Another recent media deal was for you, Raquel and Love, taking Wednesday night matches to USA Network plus the playoffs. What was it about USA Network and its new parent company, Versant, that gave you the confidence to take a good chunk of matches over to that network?
Yeah, I think, we had a really successful first season. ESPN has and continues to be a great partner of ours. And then we had a big tranche of our matches where we used our first season to test and learn. And when you're launching a new league, you're trying to figure out who are our fans, how do they want to consume content, where do they want to consume content, and then how do we build that flywheel with our sponsors and our partners and really continue to grow the sport. And one of the, I think consistent pieces of feedback, not just in volleyball, but I think sports across the board is, how easy can we find it? How easy can we remember where and how and when to find it? Because I'm sure we'll talk all about all the different places you can consume sports content now, but especially critical for a brand new sports league to make it as easy to find our games with as low a barrier entry as possible. And so when we were looking at the bucket of matches that weren't part of our ESPN portfolio, we were trying to hear what is the best thing we could do for our fans to make it as easy and consistent as possible for them to watch our matches and put it on as big a stage as possible. And so it was really exciting when the Versant team, I remember talking to them, they hadn't even announced Versant and the spinoff, and they're like, let's talk, because this, we ended up being the first kind of standalone rights deal that Versant did as a new company. And to be able to give us that stage and a dedicated weekly game of the week in prime time. Many of us have worked on other women's sports leagues and properties, and we know the decades and the grind that it took. And that's where I got to my third or fourth inning, because thank goodness for everybody else who put in that sweat equity for decades before. Because I think for the USA team, it was a no-brainer. And they said, of course we want this, and not do we just want it, but we want to give it a massive window and a consistent window that we can continue to grow together. And so that was our, number one goal going into the second season, was to plus up what we already had with a great partnership with ESPN and bring in another partner that can then give us some other things that we needed to continue to grow. And so it was very exciting, and a lot more to come, but we're excited for Wednesday night starting in January.
And I will say this, I think it's so important. And I kind of think this is unique to women's sports, and it speaks to where we are in our life cycle or whatever inning we're in. But I, of course, have a responsibility to ESPN, but I maybe even more so have a responsibility to this ecosystem that we are developing. How do we serve fans? How do we serve our partners? How do we put our partners in the best position to grow at scale, right? It's about accessibility, lowering that barrier to entry. At the end of the day, again, I'll put my ESPN hat back on. We have the most to gain, right? The majority of rights sit with us. However, we also have a responsibility as the institution to meaningfully impact the infrastructure in a sustainable way. This isn't a moment, right? Everyone's heard the conversation, right? It's a movement. It's not a moment. But to ensure that sustainability, we all have a role and responsibility, and we are not in the ninth inning. We are not exclusively competing. We are ensuring that we are laying a groundwork, just like the women ahead of us, and some key male allies, of course, have done. But we got to do the same thing, because we got to reach to the side of us. We got to reach behind us, because that's how we leave the advocacy and we just talk about the business. We're not just talking about, tens of $millions in rights fees. It's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in rights fees. That's directionally where we should be going.
Bella, we talked about a couple of sports here already, but your site covers the full spectrum. So many growth sports, so many growth leagues. What are some of the stories or leagues or sports that seem to cut through and resonate with your readers?
Man, I think what's so cool about the 9 sports is our breadth of coverage. Our 9 basketball newsroom covers women's basketball 24/7, 365. And I think what's so unique about that is the way that we can target local markets and local sports fans while still being a national media company. I think that's something that's so important for women's sports fans going forward, and just kind of the future of the way we cover women's sports. I think what's so exciting about the way we cover such a wide range of sports is that these smaller stories, maybe the athletes that don't get the national media coverage, have their story told, and their path, their stats, the way they've competed, their timelines as an athlete, all of that really resonates with fans. And every athlete has such a unique set of people that have followed them throughout their careers. So I think what's so cool is that with the wide range of sports we cover, we really allow fans to see the behind the scenes, the true, backgrounds and stories of all these athletes. And generally what does really well is the stories that people wish they could see on the national stage. And what we learn more and more is that fans of women's sports are here because they really love the athletes and they love what they do, and they respect and appreciate just the product they put out on the court or on the field, but they want to know who they are as a person as well. And I think that's what makes the athletes such powerful brands, personally, and when they align with sponsors and partners. But from a reader perspective, people really just want to know the behind the scenes. They want to know who these athletes are, and generally that resonates really well with our audience.
Cheri, I want to come back to you. We've talked about AUSL a little bit, but it's also volleyball, it's basketball, and your AU Pro Basketball League, that's played during the WNBA's offseason, 5-on-5 effort. Last year we saw the beginning of Unrivaled, a 3-on-3 league. Is there space in the market for both of these leagues to reach their full potential?
Yes, I think there's space. I'll tell you what, we love the 5-on-5 model. We love being able to roll that out with so many of the stars and familiar names from the WNBA, as well as rising talent that you may not have heard of yet, but that we see year in and year out continue to grab attention and be noticed. But I'll tell you, part of our challenge as we launched, we got really lucky we launched softball first. We launched it in Rosemont, Illinois, which was a hotbed, first entity to ever build a sports-specific facility for women. So that was that. But as we added volleyball and basketball, we were trying to we go to one city for the most part in the model and stay put. And so that city can be critical in terms of the community and even the region around it. And I think what maybe the most notable thing of all with basketball is that it found a really warm landing here in Nashville. Tennessee is a basketball state. There are people in this entire region that are super passionate about the game, specifically the women's game. And so, this is a town that was vying for a WNBA expansion team. So they're poised and ready, and they really welcomed it with open arms, and our athletes really embraced the community as well. So we're getting ready to launch the most decorated roster ever in basketball. And I am just sitting here super excited. We're going to do some very cool things on the broadcast side, some creative, some new things. Every single game of that is on ESPN Plus in 2026. And we think that's exactly the right platform to introduce all of this kind of new and different and engaging entertainment products. So we're looking forward to our second year in Nashville with a lot of momentum.
Well, hat tip to Pat Summitt for really laying the foundation there.
For sure.
State. I want to throw another jump ball up to everybody. How much do you all think women staying at the collegiate level 3 and 4 years, none of this one and done nonsense, has really helped grow fandom and help that to translate at the professional level? We've seen it in basketball. Like, how much has that really helped, and how much can it help in other sports?
It can't be overstated. I'm a UConn fan, so I followed them at every single level, be it AZ Fudd, Paige Beckers, Rebecca Lobo, Sue Bird, you name them. But I think we've certainly seen how women over-deliver in the age of NIL. And, I'm in the marketplace every day talking to brand partners and saying, what have you seen when you invest in women? And that tends to be the word that I hear most is they over deliver, they exceed my expectations. I also think it's important to just kind of generally evaluate fandom. I'm going to come back to this kind of like what inning we're in over and over again, but let's talk about like where you develop your fandom and how you develop your fandom. I'm a New York Giants fan, and like the chat better not give me any shit. I get enough of it as a New York Giants fan. But out the womb, I was a New York Giants fan. But I also at the collegiate level, I was a UConn Husky fan because I grew up in Connecticut out the womb, right? At the professional level, a lot of fandom is developing in real time. Let's look at League One. Let's look at AUSL. Let's look at the NWSL. That fandom is coming in some people's adulthood. So when we lay that foundational fandom at the collegiate level, these kids are growing up as fans of Caitlin Clark, as fans of Paige Beckers, as the list can go on, and then they get to continue on into the professional landscape, name your sport. Now, all of a sudden, you see a lot of Dallas Wings jerseys in Connecticut, right? Why is that? It's because of that fandom continuing on. So I certainly think it can't be overstated, that value, but beyond that, it's the visibility of these women. We've made it more accessible. We continue to make it more accessible in even more and more premium positions. And that's why that fandom is continuing to grow. And again, it can't be overstated how important it is.
Yeah, I was going to just echoing Susie and thinking about how, you look at legacy sports leagues that have been around kind of our entire lives and those of our parents and our grandparents. So it was easier to build fandom. There were fewer sports, fewer leagues. It was just kind of easier to attach and kind of grow with sports. When you look at what have been the emerging sports over, let's say, the last 10 to 20 years, in my prior life, spent a lot of time in the soccer space. And we, 15 years ago, we were, at the time, there was a niche soccer channel where it had all of the rights. And at the time, I remember we looked at all this data around the growth of soccer, and a big part of it was youth participation. And when we were kids, you couldn't watch soccer on TV. The sport wasn't available. And then coming out of a World Cup 30 years ago and MLS launches, and then as the sport started to grow and you started to be able to see it on TV, the fandom continued to grow in the youth market, because now not only were kids playing it on a field, but then they could come home and watch it. And it's a harder sport and I think you guys lost me for a second. It was a harder sport to follow when you necessarily have the fandom. So I think what ESPN's doing in particular is being able to bring in sports at a youth level and then at the college level and then at the pro level. If you look at a sport like volleyball that has such a high youth participation rate, it's the #1 girls team sport in the country. And now you can see it not just the collegiate game, which has been massive in a number of years, especially on platforms at ESPN. And then now you can see it at the pro level between AU and you have, Love. Now girls who are playing it at 6, 10, 12, 14 years old, they can see the path. They can go play it during the day. They can go watch their local college team or the fan that they grew up as a fan with their family because they're probably following football and basketball. Now they can watch volleyball, and then they can go see it professionally. And so the continued access to be able to watch it, not just play it, I think will help all of us continue to build fandom and continue to grow that audience and then grow the business.
And I think too, maybe opposite of the men's sports space, it's been the college games that have led the way in exposure and fandom and visibility. So for us, like if you just think about any of our sports, but if you think specifically about the AUSL, we open our season on the tail of the Women's College World Series, which is responsible for the incredible numbers that Susie was reciting before. So that is our reality, and that's tremendous for us because you're having stars built in college, and then you get to expand that runway for them to really reach their potentials as athletes.
Susie, ESPN and ABC are going to be doubling the number of regular season NWSL games next season. But, the NWSL, the audience this season, a little lower. You had some stars out this season and such. How can the league bring back more fans on TV in 2026?
I'm going to tell you something. We had a really positive growth story. We were up with Deportes. We were only down. I want to see we were flat on ABC, and we were up across all of our other networks. So I know that there was like a slight reduction from an attendance standpoint, but our accessibility story, our positioning story is growth. So, I think, again, soccer is a unique one. I think general perspective of what does soccer mean in this country? Well, I know what women's soccer has meant in this country. And that they have led the way, just like we talked about collegiate athletes leading the way. That's what we've seen in the women's soccer space. So I think from a strategic standpoint, it is not just specific to the NWSL, holistically across our portfolio. It is rooted in mainstreaming women's sports across our established ecosystem. That means talking about women's sports even more. We certainly have had a tremendous amount of progress in this space within our priority studio programming, right? What are our most well-resourced spaces? What are our most consumed spaces outside of the live broadcast? It's SportsCenter, it's Get Up, it's First Take. During women's college basketball, during the tournament, that A block on First Take is often talking about women's college basketball. So again, I think if we're talking specific to the NWSL, it's continuing to talk about it in those spaces, continuing to make it more and more accessible and exposing more and more people to the game. And I think for a really long time, be it on the sponsorship side, be it on the media side, there was this perception that women's sports were only for women. But obviously, we know that is notably not the case. We are gender balanced from a live broadcast standpoint, essentially across all of our properties. Even on, let's talk about our sub brands for a second. Our ESPN TikTok is a 50-50 gender split. Our Instagram is a 60-40 gender split. Now, we are certainly more female than our other social brands. However, that informs us. That of course, this is not just for women. This is for everyone. And we're ensuring that we are not only just making it accessible for everyone, but we are speaking to everyone when we're talking to them about these sports.
I want to ask a question about another sport, and that's the PWHL. This has clearly proven itself to be a fantastic product at the venues in the U.S., in Canada, packed houses, rabid fans. But do you all think it can grow into a viable media commodity? Bella, we'll start with you.
Sorry, let me unmute myself. No, I think absolutely. The PWHL has grown rapidly. Obviously, the appetite is there for women's hockey. And from the coverage angle, from the written editorial and journalism side, we recently at the 9 Sports brought in the Ice Garden, which covers women's hockey 24/7 as a newsroom. And it's clear that people really want to hear about it, read about women's hockey, especially on the professional level. And it's become that year-round sport. And so the appetite's certainly there. And from a fan perspective and from, learning the behind the scenes and hearing the stories of these athletes, it's certainly, primed to grow rapidly.
Anybody else have an opinion on women's professional hockey?
I would say this, and we don't have
struggles getting a larger media rights. And I know it's very early, so I'm just curious about what you all think about the future growth prospects, I guess.
I'll say this as a person who we don't have hockey in our corral, but I would say anytime you can fill arenas like they have with fans in person and experience and feel that sentiment and the passion, I think that it is a media product. And I think if there are challenges in hockey, which I personally think there are at times, in terms of making sure that the experience is as entertaining for someone in their living room as it might be in the venue, I think that's the challenge that Raquel and I are faced with in terms of trying to make sure in the production side that we are being as creative and that we are trying to find ways that to convey the action to a fan at home or regardless of where they're watching it.
Well, for both of you then,
I would also,
Cheri, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I wouldn't discount, though, the approach that the PWHL has taken in terms of building the local fandom first. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of times we look at media rights deals and we're like, we must go national and must be big. And while, yes, that's when you're looking at how you sell brand sponsors, they're going to expect a national footprint on your media rights. And that's a big part of the conversation why a lot of us from a sports league standpoint start at the national level. I think when you're starting with fewer teams, and they started, I believe, with 6 teams, their approach of starting local, they have a really high quality production. They have very good production people creating their product, but building that local fandom. I'm still a big believer in local television, whether it's, you know, an RSN or your local free over the air. But when you're in those markets, and those are hockey markets, you know, similar to Cheri's talking about Tennessee being a basketball state, and we put volleyball in volleyball markets. Those markets have really rallied around what the PWHL has done. And I think they are setting the stage for that growth and to tee up a really impactful national rights deal, because they've really built the local fandom, which will go along with them wherever hopefully the rights will go. So I think they've just taken a different approach. I think people are like, wait, what are they doing? Because it is different, but I don't necessarily think it's indicative of it not being a viable national product.
And they've been highly aware. I'm huge fans of them and their leadership, and making their games accessible on YouTube. Right move out of the gate. It's about recognition, identity, creating a following. And we all know the history of professional hockey. There was a tremendous amount of fragmentation and conflict. Now there's not. Now there's one league. There's one professional league. And we've seen that regardless, men's, women's sports, or otherwise, when there is fragmentation, it creates challenge for a regular fan to follow and consume, let alone in I wouldn't necessarily call hockey a challenger sport, but it's certainly not football. It's not necessarily basketball. So I think their approach is a really sound one, certainly speaking at engaging at the local level, developing those fan bases, making their games as accessible as possible, and creating an identity around what their league actually is, who it serves, what's important to them, and bringing the fans along with them. So, hey, we're going back to the analogy here. They're like top of the first, right? Like I'm playing this one out here, guys. We got how many more?
I guess I got to take the blame for that, for starting off with that. I'm happy to take the blame on that.
But I think that's what speaks to the nuance of women's sport and emerging leagues. Not everyone has a 30-year history like the WNBA. Now the WNBA, of course, is our top professional women's league in this country, and they still have a lot of progress to make when we compare to the men's side, let alone the PWHL is in its infancy. So all is to say, to come back to your question, do I think they're incredibly viable and have a strong future from a media perspective? Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to go to the WNBA next, because this league, like you said, it's been on a viewership rocket ship. Every time I try and make an audience prediction, I am under the mark, which, you know, it only works on The Price is Right. But, you know, these labor negotiations, it's taken some ugly turns, and all labor negotiations do. Like, do you all feel that cooler heads are going to prevail, that a deal is going to get done? Because I'm just worried that any stoppage in play could be a turnoff for some viewers.
A deal's going to get done. But, you know, at some point it will. And I think, like, the key, without getting too far over my skis, I think what you said is true. This is not unique to women's basketball or the WNBA. Labor negotiations, regardless of industry, are as old as time, and certainly in the sports space. So we're at an incredible inflection point for women's sports. And what we are seeing, you know, oftentimes I think in the past, women's sports have been othered or spoken about with an inappropriate tone or the wrong tone, be it speaking down to women or making sure women look cute on air, or the Pinkett and Trinket, whatever it might be. Like, this is business. It's business. So I actually, yes, of course, there's some challenges, and of course we want to see a positive outcome, but I actually don't hate the fact that women's basketball at the professional level is equitable to what we see of the professional sports on the men's side.
Yeah, I agree with that. A deal will get done. It's an incredible product. It's a viable product. And what's exciting to me is when that deal gets done, what's waiting for them on the other side, because they are skyrocketing.
I'll tell you, I'm jazzed for what's waiting on the other side. We got big plans over here.
Bella, you're a former WNBA player. What do you think?
No, I agree. I think Cheri and Susie nailed it. I think a deal is going to get done. I think what the product is and how the players and the leadership have negotiated, it will bode well for the right CBA for everyone. But I do think it will take some back and forth, especially with the growth the WNBA has had in the last few years. My first year was in 2020, which was when the last CBA came in, and there was big changes and big improvements. And I was really excited about it as a rookie to see those changes come in. And I can only imagine with the way the WNBA has grown in the last 5 years, means that the right CBA will be agreed upon. But it's been a hot topic, and obviously something a lot of people have been talking about. And I know the right thing will come out of this. It'll take the time.
I can't tell you the number of times just over the last 2 years that a number has come out and I've been like, wow. And I've been doing these numbers for a long time, and it is just one after another. And even without Caitlin Clark this past season, the regular season, the playoffs, the numbers are just incredibly impressive.
Most watched.
Every time it's a most watched.
Right.
Every time we come out. I wanted to take a question here from one of our audience members, Annalisa Mistretta. Thank you for the question. Do each of you have any advice for college students looking to break into the women's sports space, but don't know which path is for them yet? Raquel, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think it's finding what you're passionate about. So the great thing about working in sports is there are so many paths and types of careers you can have. You can look at each of us on the screen, and we've all taken very different ways to get here. We were joking earlier. I'm a recovering lawyer. I went to law school. I decided that was going to be my path in to working in sports. And there are so many ways to get into this industry. I think what's most important is that you have passion. So having passion for women's sports, and then what is it about women's sports that gets you excited? Do you want to go do sales? Do you want to work in production? I will say we need more women doing those things. I think we have seen growth in women in sales and women in production, but I think those are two massive areas to differentiate yourselves as women getting into women's sports. But there are so many different types of jobs you can have in the industry. So it's just figuring out what do you love to do, and then building and kind of mapping out the different ways you can get there, because there are so many different paths you can take. So don't put so much pressure on yourself on what the path is. Just find the things that you love to do and start to work your way towards it.
I think there's a ton of opportunities too. I just look at Athletes Unlimited. We, all of the work that we're doing and all of the help that we need. And so there's so many chances for young people to engage with us and really experience in a hands-on way what something's like. And I think that's the best way. Like, we've all learned things that we like and things that we don't like by experiencing them. And so specifically in broadcast, I think one of the things that people don't understand is that they only see on air. They only think of broadcast as on air. And there's so many opportunities to contribute to that product, sometimes in bigger ways than being the talent. But a lot of people don't know that. And so I think when you expose yourself to it, and I always tell college students, don't worry about the paycheck right now. The experience is the valuable part of this, regardless of what the internship might be or something like that. So I just think get yourself exposed, and any of us would say, come on, yes.
Like, network your faces off. Like, go introduce yourself to someone, even if it feels uncomfortable. Send an email. I never ever say no to a meeting, because I'm getting a little older, but I'm not that far removed from that, and I know what it meant to me when people said yes. Mm-hmm. And then it's on you. Then keep me updated on what's going on in your life. You see something cool, shoot me a note. I love seeing that stuff. Then you start to differentiate yourself. If you don't understand the various spaces within this business, one, I don't expect you to. What's the difference between consulting and working on the brand side? And what else can I do in an agency? What does an agency even do? Start to understand that. Ask questions. I think mentorship can also come in a lot of different ways. It doesn't need to be someone who's been in the business for 30 years. There might be someone who's been in the business for 3 of them, and they can tell you, hey, you know what? This is what differentiated myself in my early days. So I think look for that guidance and ways to differentiate yourself any way you can. And I know sometimes that networking word can feel overwhelming and scary, especially if you're not an extrovert. but make that your own. If that means emailing, if that means sending a LinkedIn message, if that means, you know what, I saw you on a panel, Susie, and I found you on Instagram. Cool, no problem. I'm going to follow up with you as long as you stay on me, right? And I think like none of this is ever really personal. We all tend to get busy. Stay on that person that you want to learn more about their journey. Differentiate yourself, and you'll find your way into women's sports. And I think it's the best space to be in right now. You get to wear a whole bunch of hats. You know, Cheri, I won't speak for you, but I imagine you get someone in your doors and they have a bunch of different skill sets. Great, be our Swiss Army knife. Be a generalist. Help us get better in a bunch of different spaces. And I think there's just so much opportunity in the women's sports space right now to do that.
Susie kind of stole my answer. I was going to say that being in the women's sports space, which is on this incredible growth trajectory, does allow you to wear a ton of different hats in this industry. And I think being open to learning what you're good at and what you're not good at and what you like and what you don't like is really valuable information. And I'm one of those people who's really new to the women's sports business side. I played on the professional level. My network was really important to breaking into this space, but I also was coaching for a little while, and that was a really valuable experience to learn what I was interested in and what my next step would be. And so I think all of your guys' answers were incredible and really important. But being open to trying different things in the space and utilizing your network are going to be really important to kind of break into the women's sports industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just shout out Tiffany in the chat who put in the call out about WISE, but I think finding local organizations, WISE has chapters all over the country. And then there are other sports related organizations. There's the Sports Lawyers Association. There's other ones tied to the collegiate space. So finding, sit in your market and do some digging. There's so much you can find, and that may help you with the kind of getting over the potential fear of networking. When you join these groups and they bring community together, it makes it a little easier to then go and start to meet people. So joining those, especially as a college student, is a massive kind of leg up on others because you'll start building that network earlier on.
All right, I wanted to get to some quick hits, some shorter types of fun questions. So let's get into that. We've seen a lot of alt casts come out, Manning cast, Bird and Taurasi around the women's Final Four. So what's a women's sports alt cast you'd like to see done on TV? Any sport.
And we talk about that all the time. I think we're just excited about finding new ways to produce games. I think that's, again, the beauty of women's sports is for a lot of us, we're not boxed into the same rules that our male counterpart leagues are. We're new and we can be creative and we can kind of break the mold and do things differently. So we're constantly talking about what can we do that is an altcast, or maybe it's just an alternative way to telecast, not necessarily a side-by-side experience, but just a different way to present a game. It doesn't have to be a second screen, a second channel to go to, but more, how do we just get creative and bring different kinds of voices into the mix? I'm sure, Cheri, that's probably where your head is at when you're talking about basketball and trying new things. And I think that is one of the coolest parts of the day job is we get to try new things and not be beholden to kind of a legacy way of producing sports, which makes our jobs a lot more fun.
I don't know who Chris is, but an alt cast with a stud bud sounds right. And I'll shine us a little bit. We're going to be doing an animated WNBA game. So everyone can get certainly excited about that. I mentioned that we got a lot of good stuff cooking with the WNBA. That's one of them. And I think before I even started at ESPN, my pie in the sky, my favorite thing I ever saw was the alt cast with Sue and Diana, because it was like the first time I ever saw women talking about sports how I do with my female friends, who's ever been in a locker room or played a sport. Like, we talk about sports in a fun way too. So certainly we do that very, very well inside our four walls at ESPN on the men's side. And I think you can expect more of that on the women's side as well.
All right. Netflix is coming on as the rights holder for the next 2 FIFA Women's World Cups. Are you all a buy, sell, or hold on what Netflix can do for that property?
I don't know if I was supposed to say this, but buy, right? Bigger, more. It's great. I think people ask me this all the time. Like, are they competitors? Sure. Okay. But in some spaces, but rising tides raise all ships, right? We're in the early part of the game. See him come back. Yeah, rising tides raises all ships here. And I think, what scale Netflix has, and inevitably we all need to be challenged. We all need competition to bring out the very, very best in us. And Netflix has brought that. And we've seen that with their delivery of the Christmas game. I think that was exceptional. I think they have the most viewed, somebody's got to keep me honest here, but with their women's boxing match was probably the most viewed women's sporting event that's ever existed. That's scale. So we are still at a space where the more eyeballs, the more education, the more opportunity for access that exists, the better. So I'm buying that all day.
Okay, I was going to hold, but let it be. For the record, Susie just sold me on Netflix, so it's down.
Future is a stockbroker. I
I'm
got
about
it.
to get a call from my bosses, but hey, you're still gonna come to us to watch all the sports. Okay.
Raquel, what do you think?
The Women's World Cup may be one of my favorite events in the world. So I was really fortunate to work on the first two that Fox had in my days there. And that property has continued to grow. I mean, when we produced it in 2015, it was the biggest Women's World Cup then because it had been more of a footnote and a big, bucket of FIFA rights. And it was treated as such an afterthought to the Men's World Cup. And so I think we've seen that property over the last 3 iterations just continue to grow. We've seen amazing women's national teams on the US side through, the last few World Cups, which I think really helped grow kind of the visibility for women's soccer in the US. And I think having Netflix as a global platform too will only continue to help then grow women's soccer fandom globally, because I think we're really ahead of the curve on the fandom front in the US market. And so, look, Netflix does a lot of amazing things. I think they've brought on a lot of really great people to work on the next Women's World Cup. So I'm with Susie. I think the more attention, the more resources, the better for all of us.
An all-timer, Kate Jackson, all-time ESPN employee, now leading the charge over there at Netflix. So it's going to be a great product. Bella, sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're good. I was going to say bye and leave it at that because I think you guys covered it.
All right, just a couple more. What is the best women's sports event that you have been to as a fan?
I already answered. So I would say the Women's World Cup is just something special.
I'm going to say 2 things. The Women's College World Series, I clearly I'm biased, but it's an exciting atmosphere. It's fantastic. It's softball on a big stage. So it's all of the things that really get me excited for a sport I played a good bit of my life in. But I took my niece when she was very young. I think she was 10 years old. I took her to a Tennessee women's basketball game. And she just turned 39, so we can do the math on that. But the reason that I did, it's about 2 hours from here to go to Knoxville. And the reason I did is because I wanted her to understand at a young age that the world could look like that for women too. And at that time, it didn't look like that for very many places. But when they introduced the team at Tennessee, when they introduced Pat Summitt's team, it was an event. The lights went down, the flashes came on. I, as an adult, didn't see that at a women's sports event. So I think that if I go back to a pivotal point, that was impactful.
I'm going to say, and try to answer some other questions that I'm seeing too, but I think the WNBA All-Star Weekend this past year in Indiana was a really, really amazing weekend. And it proved to me a lot what partnership opportunities, what activations, what the women's sports and WNBA fandom could bring to a city. It was really incredible to see all the activations, the ads, the ways that players were engaged with the fans and brands, the convention center. Like, it was truly like just a really well done event. And to just see the way the fans showed up for the weekend was really cool. And then from a product standpoint, from the All-Star game, I think having that fun content, branded content, the 3-point contest, there's so many opportunities for these players to show their personalities as well in that weekend. And that's something that's becoming clearly so important for the fans of these athletes as well. So I would say that was a really fun weekend, and something that just proved to me like how far we're coming in women's sports as well.
Bella, we're even now. I stole one of yours, now you stole one of mine. And I think just to put a finer point on that, I think we've all been in women's sports long enough to know when we've showed up at spaces and wished it was more, wished it was bigger, wished more business was getting done. I'm sure every single one of us and the people, watching have heard about what happens at NBA All-Star with the type of business that gets done. It's a can't miss event. WNBA All-Star is a can't miss event. If you are in this business, shouldn't miss it because business is getting done. And I think that to me is a core differentiator for what we are seeing in real time. I think Women's Final Four is another example of one of those can't miss events. Brands are going to be meaningfully activating, be it if you are competing, if you are an alumni, if you are, it's your all-star break and you don't have anywhere to go. Everyone is in attendance, be it the parties, be it the events that are serving executives, that are serving people in the business. There is a space for everyone, both those in the business and those who are just consuming as fans. That hasn't always been the case, and we're getting there. So that to me is a tangible expression of our progress.
I'll toss in a game that I went to. It was the 1996 Women's Olympic Soccer semifinal between U.S. and China at Sanford Stadium up in Athens. I don't know if I've been to an event like that since. A packed football stadium just cheering for Team USA. It was incredible as a teenager to take in. All right, final question. Headed into 2026, the biggest trend, storyline in women's sports media that you are paying attention to. Bella, we'll start with you.
Oh man. You know what? I think that professional sports leagues that are coming up, like Athletes Unlimited, like Love Volleyball, like Unrivaled, all of these leagues have such important storylines that need to be covered, and we're learning more and more that women's sports are year round, and they're not just happening in the summer or during certain seasons. It's all the time. And so I think what we're really excited about on the coverage side is just having this really exciting variety of leagues and athletes to cover throughout the whole year. And so, yeah, I think being able to see them, have those media rights, have them on TV, have them covered by journalists, see them on social, is only going to continue to grow the women's game for all sports.
Yeah, I would say mainstreaming. It is no longer niche. It is no longer a small faction of a faction, and you are seeing it in all of the spaces, be it Alona Mar competing on Dancing with the Stars and what Caitlin has done for the game, what Nafisa and Brianna have created in Unrivaled, what we are seeing across the board, right? Nyjah, we just saw what Nyjah did for our Women's College World Series numbers and the type of money that she has commanded from an NIL standpoint. Like, that's about as mainstream as it gets. We are talking about it in all of the spaces. It is being covered in all of the spaces. I got my old neighbor over here who's never talked about sports to me before in his life, talking to me about the WNBA, CBA. Like, if we aren't making it, then I don't know what that is. So it's
hey, let's not let him know that you reference him as your old neighbor.
What are we? If we're over 65, what?
All right, Raquel, what do you think?
No, I was just saying, for me, it's volleyball is here. And I think volleyball has continued to grow as a sport. We are very bullish on, League One volleyball being, viewed as like the next major sports league in the US market. And I think as we just announced LA as an expansion market a couple of weeks ago, as we continue to grow our footprint and grow, we're very excited about that, grow our media presence. Bella, I'll be calling you. But I think we have hit this inflection point with the sport. And then as we kind of get closer to LA 28 and what that can do for the sport of volleyball coming out of a home Olympics, I think we are very excited about the trajectory for the sport, and that the media partners have shown up and they're getting right behind us too.
Cheri, you have the last word.
I will. I am most looking forward to what I go to work for every single day, and that's Athletes Unlimited. I think we have the excitement of just announcing this renewal with the leader in sports, and we have an unprecedented amount of softball games on platforms that they enjoy and do well on, and then to have the first ABC game is super exciting. We're looking at a basketball season with a lot of great and fun and new things to launch there. So, and I think honestly, the better we all do in our own spaces, the better the sports, the whole ecosystem does. And so I think that's very gratifying to me to know that we're making a difference there. But I'll tell you, it's a privilege for me to be with Athletes Unlimited, and we couldn't be more excited about 2026.
Well, Bella, Susie, Raquel, Cheri, thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jen.
Yep. Again, thank all four of you, plus Austin, for a fantastic and softball analogy-filled hour here. It was terrific. Really some good insight stuff. Thank you all who participated. There was some really great engagement in the chat, a lot of really smart questions. I hope we got to as many of them as we possibly could. As per my tradition, the furthest participant I saw came from Dubai today. So thank you for joining us. We have some London in there too, but it's great to see people tune in at all hours of their day to take part. As a final note, thank you to everybody, the panel here, the previous panels since May in support of this Business of Women's Sports series. It's been tremendously well received, and because we have such a high caliber of guests on the panels, it's really what makes it what it is. You can look forward to more of these in 2026. We're going to start, I think, as early as January next year. And as always, if you have any ideas for things that you want to see on this subject, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear them and see if we can incorporate it into our programming. So thanks you all, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.